Hello, and welcome to Radio Free Nintendo. It is July 12th, 2018. I don't know why I slurred my speech there. I haven't been drinking, and I wasn't thinking about it. I knew what the date was. It just came out weird. Pray for me. This is episode 580, which I guess is significant if you enjoy numbers that end in zero, but whatever. And I am your host, James Jones. I'm joined today by Mr. Guillaume Vayette.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. Craig Leahy.
Oh, hello, everyone.
And Mr. John Lindeman.
You know, James, I'm incredibly impressed that you have remembered the episode number several episodes in a row. I mean, it's going back a ways. You're on a run.
You know, I don't make fun of you when you actually execute. When you don't execute, I make fun of you all the time. But, like, come on, man. Come on.
I'm just saying. I just wanted to point it out. This is me.
You're dredging up a stale joke so you can reuse it, even though it's not
I'm taking the high road, and I'm saying, great job. I don't want this to go unrecognized.
I'm just going to start saying random numbers now. It's episode 1 again. We restarted.
It's the reboot. We've been retconned.
Oh, we're stalling because new business is a little light this week, but that's okay. Greg, would you kick us off?
Sure, yeah. So, Hollow Knight is something I've been playing quite extensively past couple of weeks. It was one of the nice things that came along during E3 of like, yep, you can play this pretty much right now alongside the DK arcade thing, which I have that as well. I played it much less, to say the least, but that was a cool little surprise, the DK arcade thing, just quickly, because, you know, I mean, it was very conspicuous by its absence when they first talked about doing the arcade, the Nintendo arcade games as part of the Arcade Archives series. You know, we had Punch-Out and the Versus games and all that kind of thing, but DK was conspicuously absent. It's like, okay, well, is that because of what we've heard about over the years about the original code being the subject of kind of lawsuits, and, you know, Nintendo never wanted to kind of sell any kind of version. They've had some weird giveaways, like in DK64 and the sort of original edition NES ROM hack thing that happened. I think some Wii's came preloaded with that at one point, and then it was on 3DS. But then it's like kind of like the Earthbound thing. In the end, it just gets resolved. Nah, we could have done it. Now we've done it. So, but I'm not going to complain. It's nice to have an accurate version of the DK arcade. Although it's not perfect, apparently. There's some sort of flaw with Mario's walking noise. Apparently it's not correct. But maybe they'll patch that. We'll see. But yeah, I've had some fun playing that, but Hollow Knight I've been playing much more, because it's a very extensive game by comparison, to say the least. Something you kind of heard interesting things about beforehand, but really the reviews is where, you know, it's like, okay, this could well be worth my attention. So it is, you know, I guess a lot of people have talked about the Dark Souls kind of comparisons, and I am the one person on Earth who that is useless to, because I've yet to play that series at all. So yeah,
same.
If I'm missing like some really obvious kind of contextualization along those lines there, I apologize.
Are you saying this is the Dark Souls of context?
Yeah, see that even the meme, like the meme doesn't. I mean, I get it, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, like the meme has... You're as well-equipped to use the meme as anyone else is, because the meme itself, it sort of stands up a complete lack of understanding of what all this is.
It's not even... I don't know. I mean, I've been playing Dark Souls recently, and that game is not, like, that hard. Like, usually it means, like, oh, this is the really hard, you know, punishing version of X. But, like, Dark Souls is not really like that.
Because
Dark Souls
I'm not
is just
that
kind of
familiar.
a dick. Like, that's its thing. Like, it's just kind of a dick to you and doesn't care.
Well, yeah, that's exactly it. You have to do things a certain way, and if you don't do it, you die. That's about it.
You're poisoned. Deal with it.
Yep.
Does it go away? No.
Nope.
Yeah, that's the problem. What the problem is, I can't really sort of discern the difference between where that's being used appropriately and where it's being used loosely, and when it's being used deliberately loosely to take the piss out of people that use it wrongly.
If someone says this is the Dark Souls of fast food restaurants, they're probably fucking around with you.
Probably, but I'm just wondering. I'm curious as to how that sort of thing would apply to a Metroidvania title like Hollow Knight.
Well,
right?
apparently I've heard it said that, you know, if you take Dark Souls and sort of, you know, demastered it into 2D, it would be a lot like a Metroid game. Again, I can't make that comment.
So talk to us. John and I have some experience here. Maybe we can figure it out.
I mean, I did say a couple of weeks ago that Dark Souls reminded me of like Castlevania 3 in a way. So I guess that kind of works.
A little bit.
A little bit.
Still, it's classic Castlevania. It's not, you know, it was a fair bit away from the Symphony of the Night Metroid-like games that we got later. But yeah, anyway, all this to say that's not going to be featuring in my discourse of the game. But yeah, it's certainly, you know, it's quite Metroid-like in many ways, but for a number of things. First of all, it's sprawling. There is a lot of world in this, more so than your sort of classic kind of Metroid games, you know, that tend to be kind of quite meticulously kind of constructed, and sometimes can maybe give especially back in, you know, like Super Metroid's case in the mid-90s, it kind of felt huge at the time, but it wasn't really that big. This sort of does feel really quite expansive, and it is, but I suppose as far as these sorts of games go, it must be one of the bigger. But also, I guess the way you traverse it and the kind of exploration and the kind of combat also kind of factors into that feeling of how big it is, because definitely there's kind of a few wrinkles compared to the typical kind of formula that's been arrived at for this kind of game. It is a little bit different and gives a kind of different feeling. So first thing is, in terms of mapping the world as you explore it, just as the first time you go to an area, first of all, you may not have any kind of map to work with, so you're just completely blind in that respect. But then, even if you find the map maker and get that sort of initial map, most of it is not present. And secondly, you will not actually kind of add to that pre-existing map until you come back to a save point. So the first time you go anywhere, you are very much in the dark. So, and that kind of, it adds to the feeling of, you know, how far is this thing going to go? How can I find my way back if you know, it keeps going and going and I'm just getting further away from a save point? Like, it kind of adds to the sensation of maybe just sort of delving a bit too far sometimes, and, you know, kind of giving you the feeling of like, should I go back to a save point? And then of course they have this kind of mechanic a little bit like things you've seen in Shovel Knight or Mummy Demastered, where if you die you leave behind this shade that has your money, and you need to go sort of hunt it back down from when you respawn at the save point, get back to where you were and kill it to kind of reclaim your money and your full strength. So of course, if you die before that point, you know, getting back to that, then, you know, you're going to lose money, and money is pretty damn valuable in this. You know, most of the enemies that you're going to be killing kind of offer some currency up, but it's very useful in terms of, it's not so much a case of something you might imagine in Symphony of the Night or other Castlevania games of this type, where, oh, let's just buy a bunch of potions or like magic stuff or whatever. It is more for items that are going to improve, you know, your character over the long term. You know, you can buy certain kind of these charms that you kind of put together like a little build of like buffs for your character. Again, you can vary those up as well for different situations. In terms, sometimes it might be more combat focused, other times more exploration focused, but you can only do that at a save point. So again, once you kind of venture out from the save point, you are, you know, you you can't change that anymore. So again, you're kind of stuck in that mode. It gives it like an expedition feel almost when you set out into the unknown in that way. But the feeling that you get when you're sort of going into these really kind of dark places and sometimes quite kind of unsettling. They got a really good soundtrack, very melancholy. It's pretty in its way, but it's very sort of consistently kind of using almost monochrome, but not. Then it'll have like an accent color for a particular environment. So that, if there's vegetation, it might be green. If you're in these sort of crystalline caverns, it's sort of magenta. But it doesn't give the most like visual variety, but it does give a sense of a cohesive world and a cohesive aesthetic for that world, and the characters in it. There's some really nice world building going on with the some of the lore and the characters themselves. Everybody's sort of arthropods down in this Hallow Nest or whatever it is, the place where this sort of fallen kingdom, little bit like a sort of cartoon bugs version of Rapture from BioShock, I guess. I mean, how you might describe it. Things have gone awry in this place, and you're kind of finding little bits and pieces out about it as you explore. But I guess one of the most interesting mechanics in terms of the combat, which I said, you kind of improving your ability to fight with finding things, usual kind of health and magic and all this kind of stuff, but also buying certain of these upgrades. But the focus mechanic, which you can sort of use your soul, or which is analogous to magic in a Castlevania game, something like that. You can just sort of, if you stay rooted to the spot, pressing A for a bit, you can convert that into health recovery. And it reminded me of a mechanic in Metroid Other M, actually, that had this sort of, especially come into play in the hard mode, where in that mode there were no extra health tanks. So it was never a question of, I've just built up all this ridiculous health to fight a boss. You was always going to have to recharge your health to kind of see it through, unless you were ridiculously good, which certainly I was not ridiculously good at that game or this one. So that it was kind of interesting, Metroid Other M's hard mode, because it kind of like took all the extra kind of health tanks and missiles and said, like, no, you can't have them, and you really don't need them, because like I said, you could just sort of recharge those abilities anyway. And what it sort of throws up is the fact that whereas normally when you're fighting bosses, it's all about the windows in which you can attack, in this construction where you've got to have a little bit of time to just set your feet and do nothing other than recharge your health for a moment undisturbed, enough time to do that, you have windows for healing, essentially, in the attack patterns you're looking for as well. So that throws an interesting kind of component into these boss fights, of which there are many, lots and lots of bosses. It feels like there's kind of not a particularly strongly defined critical path through the game. It kind of feels like there's a bunch of different sort of sequences in which you could encounter some of these things. So it's hard to say how many of them were particularly challenging because of their design, or how many of it was because maybe I came across that relatively early in the sequence, whereas, if things had gone differently, it could have been a different boss that seemed that challenging. But, there's definitely plenty of challenge in the game. I couldn't help but feel like a lot of things were a bit damage spongy, maybe more than I would like, and that sort of contributes to how big the world feels, is because there is a lot of combat, and you kind of are having to take your time, especially if you try when there is some punishment, at least theoretically, for dying, and you're trying to be careful and stuff. You end up kind of, I did anyway, methodically, like defeating the enemies and collecting the currency and all that. So pacing wise, it's not like my absolute sort of preference to, I would probably prefer for exploration to happen faster and all that kind of thing in terms of the sort of pure joy of playing it. But in terms of creating an atmosphere, creating tension, and the fact that the bosses are, quite well designed, I felt, from an action point of view, I think, there's some good design in there, and that fits well with the capabilities of the character and as they expand and all that. I mean, I'm very pleased. I mean, I got to kind of an end game, I guess, because it seems like there may well be, more than one ending in the sort of Castlevania tradition at this point, but sort of a little bit shy of 30-ish hours or so, which is a long time for this kind of game.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, there was a lot of threads that were out there, that I wanted to pursue really before I even went to that point. So at this point, I've gone way north of 30 hours, and there's still things I want to have a look at. I've kind of already encountered some interesting additional kind of content that goes beyond that, sort of the sort of superficial ending anyway, where it's kind of going into almost Celeste style hardcore platforming territory, which was an interesting kind of turn, but which it does relatively well considering that's not really what the game's about in general. But certainly the move set is there to kind of craft those kind of levels with it. So yeah, I mean, it's been extremely enjoyable. I can imagine, it depends, I think, what exactly you like about some of these Metroid-style games may determine how much you get out of this, in terms of, I think, if it's the pure joy of kind of exploring with a very powerful character, maybe not quite so much. But if it's the atmosphere, even though this is a very different kind of atmosphere from a Metroid game, but it certainly has one of its own that's quite strong, and the sort of sense of exploration and the action of the bosses and things like that you might think of maybe more like in a fusion type of game or something like that, but much more open-ended, then this, I think, would be very much worth checking out, because obviously many people have already given it great compliments. Adam reviewed it for us. You can check his review out, and it's, that'll probably cover it a bit more sort of assiduously than I have, but it very much, I can add my voice to the amount of people saying it's very much worth your consideration, because I didn't have too many expectations before the review started, but then when they did, all of a sudden that kind of drove them up, and it still performed very well relative to those, I'd say.
Cool. This is one of those games we've gotten some people asking like, "Hey, who's gonna play this?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm sure Greg's playing it, so it's fine." But I kind of want to get to it, even though you said multiple words that made me go like, "Oh no, these aren't the games for James alarm is not going off right now."
Were the words Metroid, Other, and M, which is not really a word, but anyway.
No, I'm
more of a state of mind.
I'm quite fine with the letter M.
Okay.
But like it just seems. It gives me the Castlevania vibes more on the Metroidvania side of things, at least from looking at it. Does that seem like relatively in sync with where you're at?
Yeah, I think in a number of ways it is, in terms of like the combat focus, reminds you more of Castlevania. I mean, the one thing I should say to Hollow Knight's credit is, given like the combat focus, given the, like I said, the scale of the world, how sprawling it is, what it doesn't fall into as a sort of trap that you see a lot of the kind of Igarashi developed Castlevania games do, is like the very sort of Spartan level design or copy and paste level design, to kind of make up the numbers of how many areas the castle should have or whatever. Like, it doesn't fall into that. It's, like I said, I wouldn't say that it's as elegant in the way it kind of folds into itself and stuff as like the absolute best Metroid games, particularly like sort of like Zero Mission. But for me, just the way things are laid out, there's a lot of smart sort of features in terms of, first of all, that initial sort of foray into those areas that feeling of of being in uncharted territory and having to kind of find your way around and opening up pathways. But then it works nicely the other way, the retraversal way, that backwards and forwards kind of design, where it's like, okay, well now I've I've triggered a switch, a gate's opened up, or I've gained a new ability or whatever, and actually you can go through this area that you kind of inched along the first time much more quickly if you're coming back or passing through for other reasons and things like that. So I think the actual level design and the layouts and all that is I would say is better than your typical Castlevania game of this type.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that's always because there is a lot of nuance between those two franchises, and sometimes it can be pretty hard when something's coming in from the outside to figure out, does it fall closer to one or the other, or is it, is it its own thing that's just sort of carrying this, I'll be honest, slightly overused name.
Yeah, well, because there's a breadth of games that it encompasses at this point, which, it's true of a lot of genre labels, to be fair, but gets a bit fuzzy around the edges. I'd say it's interesting because it doesn't have the kind of explicit leveling of Castlevania, nor does it have the kind of emphasis on systems that Castlevania might often have. For instance, like the souls in the Sorrow games, Aria, Sorrow, Dawn of Sorrow, or like the cards in, you haven't got that kind of thing. So it's more like Metroid in that sense, but there is a kind of grindy component to it with the emphasis on combat and the kind of the returns that money will get you. That money is, I guess you could say it's like de facto experience points the way it falls out of enemies, although there are chests and things and objects you can find and sell and whatnot. But, like I said, these things that you can buy will have a very significant effect on how capable your character is. So it's got a bit of that Castlevania grindiness, but not as systems driven, which can be very enjoyable with when they've done well in Castlevania games. So it's more straightforward than that.
Cool. You said over 30 hours at this point? Jeez.
Oh yeah, comfortably, like I said, and more to come.
So, you said it, but it's quite long for a game in this sort of bucket.
For a game of this type, it's a lot. Some of that is my ineptitude. I've spent way too long trying to beat certain bosses I was struggling at when I probably should have just said, let's go explore somewhere else first and come back with better gear or whatever, like see if I can get some more health or, a stronger attack power or whatever it might be. But I usually was like, no, I think I can take this thing. I'm just not doing it right. And then, you waste 45 minutes or something. So, I could have been more expeditious, I'm sure, and many people might be, but still, relative to this, many of its sort of fellows in the genre, this is pretty beefy.
Yeah, cool. Well, I'm glad one of us finally got to it. It's one of those games where I want to check it out, even though like part of my brain is like, you're really just asking for it on this one.
Yeah, I really, really do like it, and I feel like in many respects it's just clearly very high quality. But at the same time, I don't know that I'd want to, bet my life on you fully connecting with it. So
yeah,
it's an interesting thing to ponder that.
We'll see. John, so we're gonna show how the sausage is made here for a second. New business is a little bit of a light lift this week after last week, even though we did the all no new business. So I'm letting you talk about Fortnite again, because Season 5 launched, and according to Polygon today, you needed 9 straight Fortnite articles in a row to get your SEO up.
Yep, you do. That's the way it rolls. You got to strike while the iron is hot,
Or when it's cooled down a little bit. Just got to keep going for those hits.
Hit got to be hit with the kids, James, just like this podcast.
John, I think the average age of this podcast listener base is like 40.
Yeah, I I've kind of said this about myself before, but yeah, I kind of feel like the average age of this podcast listener now is like what we used to make fun of John for being, like when we started.
Well, I think some of us are what we used to make fun of John for being. So it's kind of a.
No, exactly.
I will say that at least it's good to know that somebody's listening, even if it's just us.
Yeah, the inevitable march towards death continues. Right, we've talked about this. But yeah, speaking of an inevitable march towards death,
Fortnite content,
Fortnite, ladies and gentlemen,
coming to you live at RFN.
Yeah,
radio, Fortnite, Nintendo. Let's do it.
So this will be the last.
How many times can I put Fortnite in the subject or in the name of the episode?
This will be the last week that I talk about Fortnite. From now on, I will still talk about it, but it'll be called Blort Night. So.
You're gonna start calling it Radical Heights.
Yeah, we'll refer to it as code names. But anyways, yeah. So season 5 started, and this is like new to me, to like the rest of the gaming world. This is just old hat, right? Because I was the only person on the planet not playing this game, apparently. Aside from people,
everyone on this podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Aside from people not on this podcast. But yeah, so that dropped. Got myself my battle pass.
So John, for those of us who are also less inclined to understand gas games, can you explain what the seasons mean in this context?
Okay, so the seasons, I found out that they last 74 days, so they are about 2.5 months in length. And I don't know, that's pretty arbitrary. For most of these games, this concept is fairly arbitrary in terms of the length of it, but...
I mean, 74 is pretty random.
It's pretty random. I don't know why it's not 3 months or whatever, but anyways.
Or 75.
Yeah. So
it's probably a number of weeks, actually.
Well, it might be, the thing is that it probably is 75, but by the time I get to it, there's 74 days left because it starts whenever they drop the build on the server. That's when the clock starts. So by the time I get to it,
they run like
whatever.
Events on the lead up to it and stuff. Like
yeah. See, that's what's kind of the interesting stuff about this is that this is what they've kind of been doing that's pretty clever is they have in-game events that happen, like interesting stuff above and beyond just your typical, match stuff. So I guess what they did is they have this whole kind of like dimensional rift kind of time traveling sort of story arc going. It's a
loose Fire Emblem game. Is this can you get unlock Crom?
Yeah. So I don't know exactly. I haven't been following it, so I don't really know the history of it. But they had an event recently where a rocket launched. They don't really explain it. They don't provide any context. But if you were in game at the right time, you could sit there and watch a rocket launch. I guess in the middle of your match. I'm not too sure because I didn't see it.
Yeah, it was in the match.
Yeah. And so what has happened now? Well, previously, let me just go back to I think at the beginning of season 4, they had a meteor strike that changed the map so that what used to be in the center of the map was now a big meteor crater. So that was kind of something cool that they did to kind of freshen things up. It, a clever way to kind of make the map different, but yet still not have to completely overhaul the map and like make a whole new map. So that's pretty cool. And what they've done for season 5 is, a couple of weeks ago they had this rocket launch and they didn't really say what that was for. And so they've had this thing now where they have like dimensional rifts have opened up in the sky. And also I played a match earlier and there's like little rifts that you can walk into and they propel you up in the air, which you can certainly use during gameplay. So they kind of mix it up with little elements like that. And they keep things relatively fresh by doing, changing things up in terms of the play field. And with the whole time rifting sort of thing, there's now some strange objects on the playfield, like there's a Viking ship, and there's an anchor that just pop out of these like random things pop out of these rifts, and they've also added a golf cart that you can apparently hop into with probably your three squad mates, and you can run around the map.
The week after we said, well, this game doesn't have vehicles.
Exactly, they added a golf cart, so there you go.
Change it up.
Yep. Well, now that's not entirely true because the one kind of vehicle they have is and it's still in there is the shopping cart. So you can push around a shopping cart and another player can hop in the shopping cart and you can push the player around the map on a shopping cart. It's pretty
as you do.
Pretty silly. Exactly. But yeah, so I picked up Season 5 Battle Pass. So of course, I went with the one that gives you the 30 free tiers or whatever, because you know what? Time is valuable, people. My time is
money,
valuable.
John. So
I don't have
money.
time to grind through all 100 tiers, people. You know what I'm saying? There's other games to play, bro.
Apparently not.
Yeah, it's actually true. And I also kind of went all in, and I got the deluxe founders pack, which gives you a whole bunch of stuff, skins and this and that, and XP bonuses and whatnot and stuff like that. I was like, I get to a point where I'm just like, if I'm spending enough time with the game and enjoying it enough, I'm just like, I'm putting money down. There you go. So there you are. But I did confirm. I don't know if I mentioned this last week, but I did confirm that the V-Bucks, they're not cross-platform. So
They're not.
they're not. So if you
But
buy,
the things you buy with them are.
yes, but if you buy V-Bucks on your Xbox, those V-Bucks do not show up when you load up the Switch version of the game.
I see.
So yeah.
That's multi-tiers of currency.
Yeah, I mean, it's in line with what we thought, though. That's exactly what we said
it's
right from the
pretty
start.
much on point with what we expected.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. But yeah, I confirmed that because I was like, I did buy some V-Bucks, or I was awarded them as part of the battle pass. Sometimes you'll get for a tier you get 500 V-Bucks or 100 V-Bucks or whatever. And so I was playing on Xbox at the time, and I was like, I'm curious if this actually shows up on Switch, but it does not.
Does the V in V-Bucks have any meaning?
I don't even know. I have to brush up on my Fortnite lore on the canon. I'll have to check it out.
Well, be sure to go to the Fortnite wiki, not the other one, the Wikia. That one's for all the heretics.
Thanks. Yeah, that's key. Yep.
Who believe in the wrong lore. I'm a Fortnite originalist.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I believe in the orthodoxy.
Oh, don't worry. I get my fan fiction ready, buddy.
Jesus.
But so I mean, I'm enjoying it. But yeah, it's pretty cool. So I'm gonna be playing through the battle pass this season, and I have a feeling. I mean, it took me probably because I bought the battle pass before, so I got the 30 whatever free tiers. So I had about 60 to go. I got through that at about half. I got through probably about 35 of those 60 something, whatever, 66 tiers left over, or like I said, 68 maybe tiers. Anyways, I got through 35 of those, I think.
Okay.
So, and at that, not in a long time, and not playing it like religiously either. I mean, playing it daily, but not like constantly.
It's just 4 hours a day.
Couple weeks. Yeah. So you should be able to easily get through all 100 tiers in 2.5 months easily. But,
I want to point out that you earlier started this conversation by noting I don't have time to grind through all 100 tiers.
Yeah, exactly. Well, hey, that's why I.
But you should easily be able to get through all 100 tiers.
Well, yeah, with a head start of 32 tiers or whatever happens, because you have a choice where you can just, if you want to, you can go through all 100. You pay $10 for that, but you pay $25 if you want to get the 30 something tier head start. So,
do you get anything else for the head start?
I think you do. You get some bonus items with it.
Okay.
Yeah. So you get a couple other extra things too.
Okay.
But yeah, it's all fun and games. I am getting a bit better at it though. I still have yet to get my first victory royale, but I'm consistently getting kills now, whereas before I never got kills. And I can usually make it top 5, but I usually get murdered at that point.
Do you the portals that take you up into the sky, can you build stuff while you're up there?
Yeah, you could. You would be able to, yeah. That's actually a very good point. Because you can throw down stuff underneath you and then fall down onto it.
And then just shoot from on high.
Now the one thing I will say is that those things when they throw you up into the air, your like glider deploys. So you might not be able to.
Okay.
Yeah, that would probably prevent you from doing it though, so. I'm sure
they tested it.
Yep.
And it does exactly what they wanted it to do. But I do think what you described with the seasons here is kind of insidious is not the phrase I'm looking for. But it is a well-engineered approach towards keeping people engaged with this games as a service game, but also redepositing money on a regular schedule.
I mean, it's effectively a subscription.
Right.
It's a voluntary subscription because, MMOs they charge $15 a month, right? And this is $25 over 2.5 months. So you're
or 10. I mean, if you don't want to pay for the extra level ups.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. So
just because you gave them the money, John.
Exactly. Yeah. So $10 over 2.5 months.
Yeah.
Or $25 over 2.5 months. Take your choice.
It's like $1.50 a week.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But it also, for a game like this that's so dependent on its player base and dependent on, the attention it gets from being number one on Twitch and from, being everywhere, having these events, not just having seasons, but having events that tie to them, things to experience, is really, really key for re-engaging a player base on a consistent cycle.
Yeah.
And I bet they probably had all kinds of psychology performed on you to figure out that 75 days is the right amount of time to re-engage someone who comes in, plays for a week or two, and then falls off.
Yeah, I would not discount that at all.
Like it's the right amount of time for feel like, yeah, I could go back to that now.
Yeah. Yep.
Versus like, oh, that's too long ago, or I just stopped playing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like what's the average audience?
Epic's got their hand in your wallet.
Yeah. Yep.
And your brain.
Mm-hmm.
But it does go back to what you were saying earlier about them, or last week, about how good they are at being able to just, make changes to this game without having to spend a bunch of time trying to fix base stuff.
Yeah. Yep.
But the fact they have the freedom to do this is a testament to the state the game is currently in.
Yeah. I mean, like I read that it took them a year to implement Battle Royale. Like they implemented that a year ago. Like started it. So that shows you how quick they can turn it around. And I mean, now it's officially pretty much the biggest game out there.
Yeah, I mean, they in the lead up to Avengers, they had their weird Thanos event where you could just play as Thanos.
Yeah,
it's like, damn, this game's come a long way.
Yeah, I mean, I just read that they're making so much money off of Fortnite that they changed on the Unreal store.
Yeah,
they just changed the split that they give people from 70-30. In other words, Epic takes 30%. They changed it to 88-12.
Yes.
Because they're making so much money off of Fortnite, they're like, yeah, we don't really need to do 30% anymore. We can just do 12%. And we're good.
The Unreal Asset Store where you can, make assets and then sell them to people making games. They basically cut their take in half.
Yeah, like it's crazy. Like Epic's just making money hand over fist now.
Oh.
So.
We need to make a Battle Royale game, John. There's no way we can fail.
RFN Royale.
There's only 4 of us. It's not much of a royale.
Yeah.
And somebody who gets stuck playing is me, so already they're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
What a weird state the video game industry is in right now.
It is. It's an amazing time to be alive.
Are we alive, John?
There's barely a day that goes by where I don't utter that phrase.
What a time to be alive.
Oh,
yeah. And it's almost always said disingenuously.
Yes.
The shame is I can't put an apostrophe in the episode title. We could name this one Greg's Boundless Optimism.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, that is the retirement of Fortnite talk until John comes back and gets way, way into what's another knockoff Battle Royale game? There's got to be another one out there.
Another knockoff Battle Royale game.
Somebody's made another one. I mean, I can only make fun of Radical Heights so many times because it's dead. And I'm literally kicking a dead horse. But
I mean, they'll add Battle Royale mode to Black Ops 4.
I think it has a Battle Royale. I think I've already confirmed that. So yeah, there you go. So when John gets way into Black Ops 4 Battle Royale or way into calling Fortnite that so he can get around this rule.
No way. Fortnite forever, for life.
Wow.
You go get that tattoo, John. I will pay for it.
Yeah,
I will pay for you to get a Fortnite for life tattoo right across your chest.
Fortnite is going to be my Guillaume's Pac-Man Plus Championship Edition DX super drum.
You know Brock Lesnar's dumb sword tattoo on his chest? I want you to get Fortnite Forever in Gothic script in the same way. I will pay for it.
I could get the hack thing that you use, your tool.
No, that's not embarrassing enough.
Yeah, true.
I need it to be unescapably. You might attract. I don't want to think about it. All right, Guillaume.
Yes.
What do you got?
Well, I guess, I've been playing the same stuff that I've been playing for the past few weeks, so I don't have a whole lot of new things to say. Karen and I finished Fire Emblem Warriors, or at least the story mode, but now we're kind of going deep into the history mode where it takes these scenarios from actual Fire Emblem games and just has you replay them, but with the classic gameplay of the Musu game. So, that's
if you're
that's
old,
still
it's
kind
classic,
of fun.
Right? All it takes to be classic is being old, right?
Yeah, pretty much. But we're still having fun. Like it's a good game to just sit down in the heat and just turn off your brain and just keep going, keep grinding. So yeah, I don't know. Like I sounded pretty down on the game because it is extremely stupid. I sounded down on it last week, but despite the stupidity, it's still, it's still got its hooks into me. And it's still, it's still kind of fun.
In spite of or because of?
Yeah, maybe both. I don't know. Sometimes you don't feel like thinking too hard when you're playing a game, and when that,
or recording a podcast.
Or when recording a podcast, and so Musu games are pretty good for that, it turns out. Other than that, we also finished Overcooked, and maybe I mentioned something about I think I made assumptions about like possible performance issues on the Switch, but we didn't run into anything. Like I think I mentioned talking about Overcooked 2, how it seemed to play smoother than the first one on Switch, but while it might have been maybe jankier initially with patches, like the game plays very, very well on the Switch. So we went through the whole thing, didn't really have any problems. We got all the stars in the main game, which at first I didn't even think was possible with only 2 players. And I did check out very quickly kind of the single player mode, and it seems to be absolutely unfun. So absolutely do play these games with at least one other person. Because otherwise you're stuck kind of just swapping between these 2 characters. Like you get one started on chopping veggies, and then you swap the character and you go do the dishes or whatever. Like it becomes more of a... it was not particularly... You lose the whole point of the game, which is kind of communicating with some other people and trying to work together, and the game working against you, trying to break your friendships. So it's not so great. And finally, there's this game I've been playing on and off, and mostly off. And maybe it has something to do with the fact that apparently I'm more drawn to games that have me turn my brain off. But I've been playing The Bridge, which is a game that I keep seeing. Like I bought it on sale on the eShop. It came out a long time ago, and it's very often on sale on the eShop. So every time that I scroll through the sales, I see that game. I'm like, oh yeah, I own that. Maybe I should finish it. And then I play through 1 or 2 levels, and I get bored, and I stop playing. It's this game that has this MC Escher inspired look, it's very much ripping off that look. That kind of sets certain expectations for me. The Bridge uses MC Escher visuals, but doesn't really have anything all that interesting about its puzzles. All you do in the game is control this little character, and you can press the L and R buttons to rotate the screen, and the goal usually is to make it to the exit, maybe grab a key along the way, and avoid being crushed by boulders. And when you rotate the screen, the level, you can end up, you can walk on the walls and eventually like on the ceiling, and rotating the level around allows you to get places. But you have to watch out all the time for these rocks, these boulders that could crush you. And you can rewind time if you make a mistake. But the problem is that the game is so slow, and rotating the level around is so slow. It just becomes a pain in the ass to do anything, you know? Like I guess ideally you want to be able to look at the level and kind of spot exactly what you want to do, and then you execute it. Because if you're trying to solve it as you go, you're just gonna like very slowly make a mistake and then rewind and then make some other mistake and then rewind, and then it just becomes it's kind of a slog. And like not only is the rotating the level mechanic very, very slow, your character is very, very slow, and he can't jump, and you can kind of help him along a little bit by creating a downward slope for him, but create too much of a downward slope and he'll just slide right off the platform, and if there's a hole, he'll fall to his death. And so you got to rewind time again, and if you create the slightest uphill incline, like he's even more stuck than Sonic without a spin. What is that called? This
spin dash.
The spin dash, yeah, because of that problem. Because it was a pain in the butt to make your way up an incline when you didn't have any area to build up speed. So yeah, it's a very slow game, and eventually, like I play a level or two. Usually the solution is not really that hard, but it just takes a while to execute. And, I start yawning, and then I put the game down. So, yeah, last time I played it, I pretty much gave up on it, and I don't think I'm going to be picking it back up. But it's unfortunate, because it looks cool. It's like black and white, but that kind of contributes also, I think, to the fact that it's a little bit boring, because it kind of like it. Maybe my TV has really poor contrast, but it obscures a little bit sometimes. The just like seeing the platforms or seeing the walls, or like you have to squint maybe a little to distinguish like what the hazards are and where to go and what to do. Yeah, I don't know. I don't like this game.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is going to do it for new business, because I really don't got nothing to talk about. So when we come back, we are going to do some listener mail. So stay tuned. We're back with listener mail. It's been a little quiet on the listener mail, and even on talkbacks and the various places you can respond to us fronts. So do that, because it lets us know that you're listening and we're not just throwing us into the void. But be sure to send us emails, because otherwise this segment is just going to be a bunch of silence and then inappropriate jokes. You can send those to rfn@nintendoworldreport.com. The silence obviously is not possible during the inappropriate jokes. It's the awkward phase that comes after them, when we realize what we've said and that it's been recorded and that we're not going to edit it out.
You have to think that this, low ebb in emails has to be a result of the summer months, People are outside enjoying themselves, grilling out, playing sports, swimming,
At the same, all of these at the same time.
Yeah, often all at the same time.
The swim grill is a invention that's changed the world for the net negative.
Yeah, swim grill ball is taking over in some parts of the United States. It's pretty big.
That doesn't even sound good. Oh.
Anyways,
I saw somebody wants to bring slam ball back, and I thought to myself, no, this can't happen. Anyway, yeah, emails. rfn@nintendoworldreport.com. Send them to us, please. Please. We need your emails. So we're just going to go ahead and get started. Greg, would you care to read the first email?
Martin writes, hello all, I'm currently on holiday, and as such my Switch has had a lot, and I mean a lot, of play. Most of my time has been towards the Splatoon 2 Octo expansion, however. I'm currently 70 out of the 80 maps clear, and I'm blown away by the ridiculous iterating on the single idea of splatting throughout, to the extent that I've told my friends it's a de facto Mario Galaxy 3. With that in mind, we all know that Mario does that wonderful idea, complex twist-result combo well, but I've struggled to think of any game or series outside of Mario and now Splatoon that iterates on single ideas, maybe Katamari. Can you guys think of any titles, Nintendo or not, that do this? Many thanks.
The Katamari is interesting because I don't really have much experience with that franchise, but there was a Giant Bomb segment last Friday, I think, where their East Coast team just did a live stream of that, and two of the people on it were super into that franchise and talked about how every game introduced something a little bit different to try to change the game up, which I didn't even realize. So that's pretty cool because it's a really simple mechanic, but they changed fundamentally how you interact with it in such a way to make each of those games uniquely engaging on their own. And I didn't realize there are so many damn Katamari games either. So, on a Nintendo front, anybody got one that jumps immediately to mind?
Well, it's not. It doesn't really count in terms of as a whole game, but I kind of think the classic kind of post-Ocarina, pre-Breath of the Wild Zelda dungeons kind of fall into this category in terms of, they were very single-item centric. So, you would get maybe some amount of time where before you actually get the item in question, whether it be hookshot or various sort of classic staples of the Zelda series, and then you start using it, and even before you get it can sometimes be sort of the first sort of points in that kind of iterative sequence of okay, well, first of all you kind of maybe getting to having to surmount particular kinds of things without this item, and then once you get it, that makes it easier, or you can do things you couldn't do before, and then it kind of increases in complexity. And I mean, it's one of these things where when it's done well, I think it's exactly what Martin's talking about here, where it's well, it is a criticism of that style of dungeon when it's okay, well, clearly this is the item of the dungeon, so it's pretty obvious. I wonder what I might solve it with, but at the same time, when they did it in this way, where it's it's not a question of what kind of item you're going to use to solve this, it's how it's going to be used and kind of how they build on each one in a kind of sequence throughout a dungeon. To kind of create puzzles that are still going to be surprising. So when it's done well, it kind of is satisfying in the way that Martin describes. When it's not, it's just kind of feels very rote, very kind of just as a matter of course of well, this sure is another place where I'm going to aim the hookshot at something and that solves it, so it's it can be a bit of a fine line to walk sometimes, and obviously as they did so many games in the Zelda series in this formula, not all the dungeons that they did kind of reach that kind of level where it's done well, but when it is, it's good, and I like it, and it's a shame, I think, it's one of the drawbacks of the changes they made to Breath of the Wild, where this kind of sequencing, iterating on something, wasn't really part of the recipe anymore, because there was so much freedom in the order you did things. Even in the Divine Beasts, it's okay, there's so many different terminals or whatever you've got to get to, but you can get to them in any order. So this idea of kind of iterating on a theme and throwing in, adding complexity, adding twists, and this didn't really work, so they had to go with a different kind of approach there, and I didn't mind that change of approach after we'd had so many in the previous approach. It's not before time, but there is something really cool about that when it works.
I actually, and this goes back to a few years now, where when I was the dissident on the Link Between Worlds.
Between Worlds, yeah.
it had sort of the similar problem of like it didn't feel like the dungeons were really iterating on each other that much because they weren't because
they all had that's the interesting point, isn't it? Because they were discrete, like really just for this one item because you could do them in any order. Then it's kind of the iteration within that dungeon is kind of very strongly defined of like it's going to be based on this one mechanic, but they don't iterate on each other. Like you said, that they're sort of the more macro kind of scale of it, which you might see in other Zeldas where it's more linear. It doesn't come into play.
Yeah, and so that also meant that once you learned something in the dungeon, largely you could just forget it once the dungeon was over and not need to worry about it again.
Yeah, because you got two sets. You had the first 3 and then the final 7 or whatever it was, So
right.
I think really I think they could have done some cool things if the structure had allowed for that kind of iteration would have been with the whole going into the wall mechanic. If you had more than 2 kind of grades of dungeon in the game, to kind of ramp up the kind of, because it's a cool idea, worked really well with the 3D. There's definitely some clever things they do with it, but you do feel like they're a little bit hamstrung by the structure they wanted to go with, which again I can understand why they wanted to change things up structurally, because they'd been in such a rigid, repetitive structure for a lot of years. But just in that particular sense, it kind of limits them.
I think in that same franchise, in fact, in that same like area of the franchise, it's not interior to the game iterating on ideas, but I think although nobody played Spirit Tracks, like it did not sell particularly well. I always thought Phantom Hourglass was a really solid game. It had a lot of neat ideas. Spirit Tracks pretty much iterates on all of them, like even in I know people found the train like ridiculously restrictive versus the boat, but there were reasons for it, and it helped streamline the game in a lot of ways. But how it handled the central dungeon, how it handled the game world, like moving through it, how the game world evolves as you play the game, which is not something that happens in Phantom Hourglass. How they put quests into the world to make going through it make more sense. Or give you more agency when you're in the world and more reason to do it. How the levels are designed, how they use the interface of the DS. Like there were no more puzzles of okay, now you have to close the DS lid for a minute and then reopen it.
Yeah, that was a little bit. I was like, because Phantom Hourglass was what, 2007?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so it was a little bit late even then.
Did Spirit Tracks have the dumb blow into the microphone?
You had the pan pipe, the spirit pipes.
Yeah.
So
not all ideas were good ideas.
No, it wasn't. I think the best example of what Martin's talking about in that game, as far as I recall, and it's been a while since I played that game.
It's not a retroactive, except DS games are all bootlegs now.
It is a digitally available one, I guess. I don't know how optimal that is on Wii U, but there's that. But is in the central dungeon, the puzzles involving the kind of quasi co-op with Zelda Spirit. I just seem to remember, it's all a bit vague at this juncture, but I seem to remember they did some really clever things building on how complex they could get, and really kind of probably the most enjoyable aspect of that game to me.
That actually, because like that was a really neat idea they put on top of a game that was already full of ideas like that. Like Phantom Hourglass was already a ton of things where they're like, okay, we gotta do this different, we gotta do this different, we gotta do like really applying that genre, that franchise on top of something completely alien. They really just started ramping things up when they put the weird spirit control stuff on there too. It's a neat little like side alley of the franchise of trying new things, but it's more at a macro level that you see the iteration. I think internally though, Punch-Out's a pretty good example. Although the combos obviously don't move from character to character. A lot of like learning how to work your way through a fight does, and so they may not do the same move, but they're all the moves in that game for the most part are variations on a theme.
Yeah, it's in terms of talking about how in Splatoon you've got this core set of abilities that are very sort of elegant and they don't expand. I mean, the Octo expansion, to be fair, does kind of play with things in ways that you've not seen before, like taking specials like the inkjet and just letting you use it indefinitely within in the confines of a level that's specifically designed around that. But in general, it's just the same set of abilities, and what can we do with this? And that's the thing. I mean, Punch Out, it's very limited, isn't it? It's not like let's throw in some crazy power ups or like the RPG element of character growth or anything like that. I mean, it's all about the opponent providing the variety and the challenge and all that. And then, of course, the best example, the most sort of literal sort of iteration is the title defense in Punch-Out Wii, where you take pre-existing characters' sort of attack patterns and then sort of paper over some sort of weakness in them, like taping a manhole cover over King Hippo's
I knew you were going to go to King
belly
Hippo.
button, and then it's
the
like,
most striking.
Well, I did know how to beat this guy.
Glass Joe's foam guard is pretty.
Yeah,
good.
he's got the training, the sparring helmet on to protect him and stuff. Just like, okay, well, I did know how to beat this guy, but now clearly that's the strategy's gonna have to change. But it still feels connected to their sort of previous version and stuff. So yeah, that's you're working within pretty tight confines there, but to actually try kind of introduce something that feels fresh in that is quite a neat little trick.
I don't know how I made this jump. Maybe it's late Wii games, and that was the jump I made. But Rhythm Heaven's in the same vein here.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, in some ways, there's a kind of the remix is a kind of iteration unto itself, isn't it? You have the constituent games, and then you have the remix that incorporates the preceding 4 or 5. I think it depends on what game you're talking about or whatever, but. And then you're incorporating them, mixing them together and all that kind of stuff. So you've got that component, and then you get a subset of games that will be the previous, fundamentally the same as the previous one, but then they introduce like an extra action or some other kind of wrinkle that really kind of changes it up and that might make it substantially more difficult. And they usually try and like marry that with the visuals. Like one I can think of just off the top of my head is the whole and I played this in Japanese, so if anybody if there's a bit of sort of a dissonancy, that's the reason. But the alien interpretation one, where so the whole thing is like you're interpreting like what the aliens say, but then they flip it around and it's the human that's being interpreted for the aliens, or like the aliens are in the control room and all that kind of that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a good one. My examples, I'm sure if I had thought about this email earlier, maybe I would have had more Nintendo examples. But right now what comes to mind is Etrian Odyssey. Just because I keep being impressed by the care that they put into their dungeons, the puzzles in their dungeons, so that they don't always repeat. You're not always doing the same thing, and they do iterate in that. You might have at some point you're exploring a labyrinth, a maze, and you've got water all over the place, and then you do something on that floor, and then all the water turns to ice. And so what used to be a wall becomes ice, and when you step on it, you can't stop. You basically, like, you're sliding down to the next wall that you hit. And then they might have, have you light bonfires to kind of warm up the place. And so in certain places, you're going to have puddles again, like you're going to destroy the ice. And it just like, even though each of these games have like 30 floors, like they never really seem to repeat. And towards the end, like you get some bonkers stuff, like in the 5th game, you're basically playing like Minesweeper for a side mission on the game map. So I don't know. It's impressive, but at the same time, I realize that it's basically like the 30 floors, like basically like it's maybe 30 very similar like puzzles in the Professor Layton game. It's not that much, but just because it's kind of a the games last maybe like 50 hours or so, and it still feels like they're maybe iterating way more than they actually are.
Yeah, well, that's part of that. That's part of the kind of the trick there, isn't it? Like, is
Right.
kind of giving that feel of something having a twist or freshness when, you know, maybe it's modest or it's slight, but I guess if it's clever, it still achieves the intended effect, and there's something to be admired, I think, when you realise that it's being done within you know, these kind of very tight kind of confines. Of, you know, Martin talks about single ideas, you know, that when it's that narrow, like I said with Punch-Out, and yet you still kind of get more out of it. I mean, however fun it is one thing, but it's more like a kind of appreciation when you step back from it and kind of realise what they're working with and how they're achieving this.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the game I was thinking of, which is how the Layton games iterate over themselves on ideas. And not just puzzles. Like, they'll iterate over story beats. They'll iterate over like how things are hidden in the world. You know, I would argue series over the course of the series, they'll iterate on characters. Luke is a great example. Luke is a very different character than he was in the first game, even when you jump back in time to the point of, you know, right before the mysterious village, because they realized that he was insufferable in that game. You know, it's quite literally iterating on the design of how they make their game, but in the puzzles and in the game exploration, as you go through each game, like how they hide things, start to pick up variations on a theme, especially like the hint coins and the secret puzzles. And you mentioned, like, there's about 30 to 40 puzzles that get reused per game, and that may not seem like a lot, but there's like 160 per game. So it ends up being a pretty big number, and a lot of times you'll see like 3 or 4 variants on the same puzzle. And then the download puzzles that will come later will usually be variants on top of ones that were already done a bunch of times. But you'll also have whatever dumb garbage Luke is collecting throughout the game that unlocks other, like, weird different kind of puzzles, like the bird thing or the dogs or the robots or whatever dumb crap he's sticking in his suitcase. That he just finds like littered around the world. But yeah, it's those games. Like, if you drop me at the end of a Layton game, I would be pretty, not just from a story beat, but from like a gameplay beat. Like, I'd need to ramp up for a while, especially when they actually have a new type of puzzle in it. I think that was one of the weaknesses of the last game with the different puzzle master, is that it didn't really feel like it was iterating that much. So it was just like, here's the next little story plot, or the next little, like, because there was a bunch of like freestanding stories loosely looped together, and then it'd be like, okay, more of these puzzles, and this is pretty much the same difficulty as the last time I played these, so
Well, plus the solution was always the same. Like you said, that every time that there was some sort of math puzzle involved, it was always actually kind of like the way that the puzzle was worded.
Yeah, it was a trick. It was a trick question. Which is amusing the first time, less amusing the second time, is just like, fuck you the third time, and the fourth time, you're like, oh, good, a puzzle I don't have to think about.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of you know, game series from game to game that iterates on a core concept, I mean, I think Castlevania is a perfect example of that. I mean, going all the way back to the first game, you're just a dude with a whip, and they pretty much, you know, extended that, played with the way the whip controlled, played with the way that, you know, still kept the jumping really stiff, and then they, you know, expanded that out to where the jumping was a little bit more, you know, you jumped higher, jumped further, had more control, had, you know, you could use a sword, added RPG elements, layered all this stuff onto it, but it kept the concept, the core concept, roughly the same, and just kept iterating on it until it actually became, I would argue, almost a whole new genre. Like, you know, it just completely, it strayed it didn't stray far from the original game, but yet it was so different that it could be a genre unto itself.
Yeah, 1, 3, 4.
Mm-hmm.
By the time you get to 4,
Yep.
Because we're just gonna cut Simon's Quest out because that's like a whole fucking thing.
Just ignore it.
1 3 4. Like by the time you get to 4, it is much more of an action platformer game. Like there are some RPG elements earlier in the series. Those have largely been pushed out. It's really just like platform through Dracula's bungalow and then get warped back to start and just do all kinds of crap and just like fight things. It's much less about like, hey, we're going to explore this area and find stuff and interact with people. It becomes very focused on just the core platforming mechanics. But if you play 3 and 4, you can see it.
Yeah.
Like you can see the jump. It's kind of like Mario. You play 3 and 4, you can see it. Or Super.
Yeah.
If you play 1 and 3, 1 and 3 seems like a big jump. But 1 and 2, real 2, not Western 2.
Yeah.
Is very iterative. 2 to even then, lost levels to 3 is a big jump.
Yeah, it's it's a kind of extra level pack type stuff. It really is, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't.
It iterates on some ideas, but mostly just to be a dick.
Yeah, mainly just taking it into more punitive territory. Absolutely.
Anything else before we move on?
Maybe Pokemon. I mean, I know Pokemon does stay the same, but you want to talk about iterating on a core concept. Jesus.
Pokemon's weird because like they'll introduce a new idea every generation and then just like fucking back out the next time.
There's a certain amount of subtraction by the sound of it, things that don't stick.
Here's Ultra Evolutions, those stunk. Here's Aloha forms, we'll get these out of here.
Yep.
Like it's very like this weird, we have a new idea, let's try it for a generation. Okay, what's the gimmick for the new generation?
Yeah.
You want to carry over the old gimmick? No.
Yep. It's gimmick-based iteration, not... It's iterating on what gimmick they have for the generation, not really iterating on anything else. Yep, very true.
All right. John.
All right. Ian writes, hello. As it stands currently, I think that Nintendo's release lineup is looking a little sparse for autumn 2018. Do you think that is a fair statement, and does Nintendo need to take steps to make up for it? I feel there are a few options to deal with this. Would the 18-month mark be a nice time for a price drop of the console? Or do you think that a pack-in would be more reasonable? As 4 of Nintendo's biggest games on the system will have received substantial DLC, perhaps these games should be re-released, including this DLC. And also, would a budget game range be possible on the Switch, or would the cartridge price get in the way? Anyways, would love to know your thoughts on this, or even if I'm being too harsh on the lineup, or jumping to conclusions when Nintendo or third parties still have lots of time to announce games being released in this time period.
Hey, we love gun jumping on this show.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, we encourage it.
Mm-hmm. The bigger the gun, the bigger the jump.
That's right. I mean, I think we can all agree there is still time for them to announce stuff.
Yeah. Well, there's been hints just lately about more things to be announced.
Yeah.
Right. That's the thing. Like ever since we received that email, actually Canada got a price drop on the Switch. $20. It's not, it's not a whole lot. That's like 5% of what it used to cost.
Is that an inflation adjustment?
I doubt it.
Exchange rate or whatever?
I haven't paid attention to that. It's really weird. The timing is weird, especially with the, kind of a kerfuffle between our countries in terms of.
Well, they're coming from China. It doesn't really matter.
Right. Yeah. I really don't know.
Yeah. I wonder if it's a currency thing or if it's just like they redid the math and they're like, they can probably drop this a little bit.
Right.
It doesn't really seem like they publicized it too hard.
Well, yeah, they had it on Twitter.
Yeah.
I received an email about it because I get Nintendo of Canada's emails. Yeah, I'm looking at the exchange rate, and no, it doesn't seem to be an explanation for that. But yeah, and like because of that price drop, also I think that they timed it so that several stores are running promotions where you can, if you buy a Switch, you can get like one of a selection of games like half off, and those games are Nintendo games or Mario plus Rabbids. Okay,
so maybe it was just kind of like a co-marketing deal,
right? I don't know.
I mean, it wouldn't be quick enough for them to be actually saving money in manufacturing, would it?
Probably is. I mean, this SoC's been around for a little bit.
Yeah.
I know they just pushed another hardware revision, in part because of the vulnerability on that NVIDIA had in their chipset.
Right, right.
I would assume at this point they're not. It doesn't cost as much to make a Switch as it did a year ago.
Well,
but
there's also
not...
the question about them even being able to sort of procure enough. There's competition for component parts, and you know, they were sort of a bit limited in terms of how quickly they could churn them out. I don't know how that situation has evolved since, I guess, because it's not just about their timeline, it's also about their competition with other companies, sort of, so there's a number of variables there.
I want to say during the investor Q&A, they made it clear that they have secured the contracts to produce the 20 million.
Yeah, to hit their target. And I guess that's the interesting component of this, I guess, is that since E3, and that's when we got this email, we get a sort of more solid sense of what the lineup's going to be like for the second half of the year and all that. The stock price has taken a couple of step changes downward. There's some dispute, I guess, over exactly what's causing that. And we all know it's not always the most sensible things, like where it can't process publicly available information about how much Nintendo actually owns of the Pokemon company. When you had the Pokemon Go fever a couple of years ago. But certainly the suggestion seems to be that there's some doubt in the markets that there is enough in Nintendo's lineup to actually deliver that on their targets, and that's why they've taken a bit of a haircut on the share price. So yeah, it's the sentiment that's out there, kind of in general. It's hard for me to talk about it from the point of view I really don't fear having a lack of things to play on Switch.
Right, personally, same.
Yeah, so it's that component of it on a personal level in terms of, I mean, you can look at it and say, I doubt I'm going to be getting on the Super Mario Party train. It's nice that there is some online in it. Because there was some question about that when it was initially revealed. We did the reaction podcast, but it's a kind of, it is a limited mode. You got the certain mini games can be sort of played, in a kind of mini game challenge kind of format online, but it's not the full board game kind of scenario. So as you'd expect, it's not a pillar of the game.
No, but I would actually expect at this point, like, please, for the love of God, let us suffer together. Connect the world in your suffering. Unite us in anti-salvation.
So in that sense, it doesn't seem like it's a hugely significant title, and that maybe that's there's a gap there for something that could have been more impactful. But I mean, it's like I said, I think in terms of things to play on the system, there's a great deal with all the indie stuff and third party stuff that comes out on a very regular basis. But in terms of like shifting units of the hardware and all that, maybe you don't need that many if your Pokemon and Smash Brothers sort of live up to their potential in terms of getting people on board. They are very powerful kind of products that certainly could sway people to get on board with Switch, especially Pokemon. You would have thought has the potential to reach a bit further outside the constituency that's already bought one.
Yeah, and I mean, with the carrot that's dangling out there, that there's going to be another Pokemon game coming early,
yes, there's certainly
2019, right? So
just to kind of assuage those who are kind of like, well, is this it? Kind of thing. Is this the extent of Pokemon that's going? Because I've said, I mean, it's a little bit. Pokemon spin-offs have been on every Nintendo platform for a very long time, and they might be good games. They might sell well, but they're not necessarily system sellers on any kind of huge scale because people know they're spin-offs, they're not the real thing.
Yeah.
And yet to be seen how exactly Let's Go Pikachu / Eevee is perceived in the sort of wider public. And I wonder whether that's some of maybe underpinning the market skepticism about whether that this is going to get the traction that it perhaps Nintendo thinks it will. But on the other hand, I think there's an upside with Pokemon that, like, if they tap into the Pokemon Go kind of aspect that goes even broader than core Pokemon does, well, maybe it could do incredibly well. So yeah, I haven't got a good sense of what that's going to do for them commercially.
I think it'll do fine, but having played it, it just feels like the veneer of a game, and I just don't think it's gonna get like that long burn that the normal Pokemon games have. But maybe I'm wrong. Like, it just feels so incredibly slight. But I mean, look through. I think Smash is big for them. I mean, they haven't announced their online plans, which means they haven't really talked about a lot of stuff.
Yeah, there's definitely more to there has to be inevitably.
I was blown away by the number of sites who were like, Nintendo will talk more about their online plans later because somebody said it this week.
Was that in the official publication of the investor stuff?
Yeah, I think so. And like that got turned into a bunch of news stories. It's like, yeah, no shit. They weren't just going to launch the thing. It's like, what? Calm the fuck down.
They haven't talked about everything. There were the obvious blanks left to be filled in.
They barely talked about anything.
The last time, just that second 10 NES games that's going to launch with it or whatever for a start. Yeah,
I mean, so they've got time. They've got time, opportunity, and need. So like they will talk about more things. I do think the idea of re-releasing some games with the DLC on them is interesting, but I don't know what games you would do it for.
Yeah, well, they kind of Mario Kart 8 is that game,
right? And they weirdly just mentioned that Mario Kart 8 is getting more stuff.
They might be coming back.
Well, obviously, they've already patched the Labo thing, like the controls. So that it might be something as slight as that.
Sure. But like they're going to continue to keep that game going as well.
And that is the other thing I would say. From a commercial point of view, I think Labo, it may have a sort of a significant role to play once you get to the big shopping seasons at the end of the year, because it strikes me as more that kind of thing than just something that's going to go crazy in April.
I do think, though, that trying to figure out what game you could just bundle the DLC with is tough because, of course, Zelda's DLC is quite significant. And you wouldn't want to have that at the start. It doesn't make sense to get that DLC at the very start of the game. Splatoon's is huge, and also they don't need to help Splatoon at all. Splatoon is fine.
Yeah.
Splatoon's selling just fine, thank you very much. I don't know what else they've got out there. Like, so bundle of
Xenoblade 2 is still waiting.
Right, Xenoblade's DLC is going to be sold separately, like as a standalone. So that's a whole different ball of wax on that one. I kind of go towards bundles then. Have there been Switch bundles?
Yeah,
they have it in Japan, I want to say.
Yeah, outside of Japan as well. Sometimes not as cool. Like I think in Japan you had like the Splatoon 2 bundle that had the color Joy-Con, the appropriate color Joy-Con, whereas like over here it was just the neon red and blue Joy-Con in with it, and then you have Super Mario Odyssey with the regular red Joy-Con kind of bundles and stuff. So I mean they've had some. And I think definitely the online service you could like repackage games
to have like some eShop bundle with an eShop card built in it,
just like a free trial of the service for people who are buying the system new at the end of this year, who haven't had the year and a half free trial that we've all enjoyed.
That's right.
You certainly kind of want to bundle that in with the games that. So you could certainly imagine some slightly kind of new packaging for the big online games that have already come out, the ARMS and Mario Kart 8 and Splatoon 2, and possibly, maybe you could maybe release what they've done with what Ubisoft have done with Mario plus Rabbids, which the gold edition or whatever, where the DK adventure is folded into it. I mean, you could do that. I mean, a number of the biggest games you would have thought probably wouldn't make sense for budget territory yet. Splatoon, Mario Kart 8. Like, there's no way you'd go there. I think probably the best candidates for that are probably a bit too new as well. Like, maybe a year from now, I think something like Kirby or Tropical Freeze could be quite apt for a budget.
Arms might work now.
Or ARMS, yeah, but ARMS is probably the best fit because that is a year older than stuff like Kirby and DK.
And it's fallen out of its support window, so they're not making any more new content for it.
Yeah.
But it's part of the online, so getting it in that game is very online.
Oh yeah.
So if they're trying to push the online service, that might be the game that like maybe they release it like ARMS and you get a free 3 months of the online service and not change the price at all, or something like that. Something that
and I
relatively
guess
slight.
And that's the thing, I guess. I don't know how much the production costs that are mentioned in the question, kind of at this stage, handcuffing them in terms of how much they want to go with discount prices on games, because we know Nintendo's very keen not to sell anything at a loss. But you could find other ways, like you said, like you mentioned just then, to kind of make the value proposition seem more attractive without actually just selling the game for a cheaper price that's not attractive for them.
And there are games that are physically sold that aren't $60. I mean, Shining Resonance Refrain is $50. Like right out of the gate, and that's a big game. That's going to be on a big cart. There are games sold for less than that. There's
of course,
what we see tractor game.
What we see a lot of with the people, the third parties that have to license these things is going for the smaller card size. So clearly,
you download the rest.
Yeah, and you have to download the rest of Wolfenstein. Most recently kind of example of that, where there are cards big enough to hold that game on it, but clearly the margins are just too fine for them to accept that. They probably figure the kinds of audience that they're going for, are perfectly fine downloading some of the game off the internet. Although I think the bigger problem is the storing it. It's not the downloading part with Switch.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's one of the ways that they pull what they did with the Wii U, where like here is more storage, and then we're gonna bump down the other one to a less expensive is the way of putting it, I guess. Like we're like when they phased out the white Wii U, and then they pushed the storage sizes. Like maybe that's what they do with Switch. Like this one's got bigger onboard menu or storage space, or just hell. This one comes with an SD card installed. Here it is. It's already in there. Prepared expressly for you. So you don't have to go buy one yourself. Like the bundles could be something that slight. Like that relatively low effort is just like, okay, we have now put this game, this download ticket in the box with the game.
And then, of course, the sort of prospect of doing new retail re-releases of games that have had DLC. We talked about that, but also, and then there was the question of Mario Kart 8 getting more updates, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. But there's Mario Odyssey still sticks out as something that is particularly as strongly as it seems to keep selling. Obviously, it's no Splatoon 2 in Japan, but
I mean, no one can be.
Yeah, but it keeps going, across the world very nicely. And the fact that they've talked about Mario Kart 8, which outside of Japan seems to be the kind of evergreen, like anybody who seems to, there's a pretty high percentage of people who, if they're buying a Switch, they're getting that with it. But Odyssey is also in that kind of category, and it would seem like a decent case, and that could kind of maybe fill in something in the autumn lineup for people who might be a bit more kind of focused on just consuming the kind of Nintendo, either Nintendo developed or Nintendo kind of championed and spotlighted content through the end of the year.
Here's my theory on price cuts, and then we'll move on. I'm thinking spring season 2019, because they'll be outside that Christmas window. They will probably have a game coming out around that time, because they usually do. They'll have had a full holiday on shelves with stock. Remember, last year they were on shelves, but you couldn't really find them. Well, it was tighter to find them. Like they'll be fully in stock this time, no problems. And they'll definitely have been able to sort of start consumerizing the decreasing cost of producing the system. And they'll have moved, if their goals are right, they'll have moved, 34 million units at that point?
Mm.
They'll probably need to get a little bit of juice going.
But I guess that may be the other component of this, in terms of if they don't meet the goals, or they exceed them, or whatever, you've got to think that might be the time where they really start to think about, okay, do we need to do more aggressive bundling, discounts, whatever, or are we just fine? Once they've kind of played the Pokemon card and see how well that kind of works, and Smash Brothers 2 and all, and see how close or not they get to this goal, that might be the time where it's like, okay, we need to think about where we go from here, because it is a significant question. We've talked about that down the years of like when you move Pokemon to a new primary platform that's way more expensive than the 3DS was when Pokemon arrived on that, and going back to DS and GBA and everything else, that I think that's going to be a significant kind of decision sort of point for them. So, well, okay, can can Pokemon be a system seller when the device is this expensive or not? Or to what extent, I should say. So yeah, I think that maybe this year, this autumn, it's probably a little bit soon for anything really kind of aggressive, unless they're like way falling behind. But I can't see that, because it's so backloaded, isn't it? I mean, Nintendo always does an inordinate chunk of its business in that end of the year period. So if there's anything that's going to happen between now and then that they've got to say, oh wow, we've really got to think about
this is not the
course.
Wii U.
So it's going to be stay the course until you see those results come in, and then start of next year, building up for the end of the fiscal year, going into the new one. In April 2019, I think that's where you might see some of these sorts of steps, like bundles and discounts and all that kind of maybe come into play if things aren't going quite as they would hope. But generally, I mean, maybe it's a little bit of a kind of unkind characterization of the lineup to say that it's a little sparse, but not particularly. I mean, I know it's hard. Like I said, I'm not that concerned about it, so I wouldn't.
It has a strong risk of, if you just buy Nintendo games, it doesn't necessarily speak to you besides Smash. I think that's what the burn has been here, and Smash. You can fucking write all the emails and shit you want. This Smash game, Ultimate, looks a lot like Smash 4. Like, it just does. And so I can see people not particular, especially relative to, like, the previous jumps. So, I mean, I can see a lot of people who look at this lineup and go, like, there's nothing really that makes me, like, jump out of my skin. There's no Mario on the...
Yeah, I mean, look, that was tough to top as well. I think that's part of the problem. They went big, with some of their stuff last year. Even to the extent where you're talking about games like Splatoon 2 and all that we're going to keep getting The package at first with Splatoon 2 was itself a bit like what you said about Smash Ultimate. Is it really that different from the original? Of course, you jump ahead a year, and the amount of kind of modes and stages, and the DLC expansion campaign and all that. Well, it's quite a lot different from the original at this point, though not fundamentally. But yeah, it's like I said, it's. I don't think it's entirely inaccurate, but at the same time, it's like there's so much stuff to play.
Yeah. It's totally your opinion's going to vary based on how you.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much on the eShop, and I know discoverability is not ideal on there. They've addressed it somewhat with a little featured section, and you can sort of toggle between games that are download exclusive and including the retail releases that are in the chart section now and stuff. So kind of making some progress in that area, and it's just maybe user reviews would help or something, but there's so much good stuff in there to be found of along a lot of different kind of genres, and I mean I'm not. I don't feel the sort of lackingness of what's lacking in the. It's not going to hit home what's lacking in the lineup, if indeed it is. Yeah.
All right, we got to move on. Guillaume, please.
Jonathan writes, so I've read numerous articles that make it seem like Nintendo really has no interest in making another F-Zero game. They all seem to boil down to not having any ideas about where to take the franchise from GX, and not wanting to just make another F-Zero game but with better graphics. This take on future F-Zero games really bothers me. I have a hard time believing that Nintendo can crank out at least 4 separate franchises of brightly colored, family-friendly platforming games and think they're all so wildly different from each other. I'm looking at you, New Super Mario Brothers, that they're worth making. Oh, I'm also looking at you, Kirby, but the graphics look like yarn, and Yoshi, but the graphics look like yarn. However, they can't seem to come up with one notable innovation on futuristic jet racing games every 5-6 years or so, while simultaneously they can come up with enough new ideas to make a new Mario Kart game every console. And speaking of Mario Kart, if I'm being honest, I'd love a port of F-Zero GX to the Switch with some online features and leaderboards.
So you want a new game?
I guess this email boils down to a few basic thoughts. 1. Do you really think every iteration in all Nintendo franchises has enough new content to pass the standard F-Zero is being held to? And 2, is F-Zero but with better graphics, quote-unquote, really even such a bad thing every 8 to 10 years? I vote no. And 3, prove Nintendo wrong. Come up with one plausible new feature for an F-Zero game.
What if we don't want to prove them wrong?
Yeah.
I mean, you gotta understand. So first off,
just very one quick point about number 1. Like, do you think every iteration in all Nintendo franchises has enough new content to pass the standard F-Zero is being held to? Maybe not, but they don't need to because they're selling.
Yes, because they sell a billion units.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I mean, it's just
Splatoon 3 could just be Splatoon 2 with different hair colors, and it would sell at least 3 million units.
I mean, New Super Mario Brothers 2. It's got loads of coins in it.
It's all about the gold.
Clearly,
Get the slogan
does
right,
not
Greg.
Meet that threshold. But again, I mean, that was.
Hold on. Before you say that, because I don't want you to say something you can't take back. What do you? I bought some DLC for that game. What do you think it adds?
The DLC to New Super Mario Brothers 2. I'm trying to think. There was some super hard stuff. I had some. It was fun. I mean, it's not that novel.
There's one thing I would say that it adds more than anything else, though. More
What's
gold.
That? Oh,
More
yeah,
gold.
yeah, that's true. There's always...
There's one level designed entirely to build up your total coin collection.
It's so, you know,
It's
I could clearly see where he's coming from, but yeah, I mean, it depends how well the franchise sells. You know, what amount of new twist is thought to be needed to get to green light a game. We're back to that again.
It does strike me as weird because it's as if Nintendo only seems to think that F-Zero is not finding an audience because the gameplay is lacking, or like there's some sort of gameplay hook that they're missing. Whereas like there's all sorts of reasons why it could, you know, in terms of marketing, that would have perhaps prevented it from finding its audience.
So I want to point out a couple things. First and foremost is the whole like we're not going to make it anymore if we don't have any new ideas is a little bit of a misnomer. Basically, what this comes from a Miyamoto interview, I think back in 2011. What he says personally is that like I don't really have any new ideas for that game or for that franchise, and he was speaking more broadly at the time. It came up in the context of F-Zero, and so I just choose not to work on it. It's not like we can't make this game so we don't have new ideas. It's I don't want to make this game because I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, it's like games are never really canned. I feel like it gets to a point where somebody has an idea and then they become a champion, and that's not really predictable.
Right,
Yeah,
but if a game has no
problem,
champion,
though.
you end up with the Street Fighter 3, where like after 3 in the various iterations, it just sat because no one at Capcom wanted to go, I'll make the next Street Fighter.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
that's the thing. It doesn't. Yeah, I mean, because that's the. I mean, yes, Miyamoto was a champion for Star Fox Zero, and then that does exist. You know, so that's the kind of the difference is that nobody has done that with F-Zero, and I think a lot of the time, you know, within Nintendo, it probably is going to be, you know, it would have to be somebody with an idea of like, oh well, we can look at it at a different light now. We can do something different with it, which, you know, is not essential in terms of, yeah, you could have better graphics or I mean, in terms of the question of something that would be plausible and new for F-Zero is just online play, because it predates that. At this point, you know, like there haven't been F-Zero games all predate Mario Kart DS.
Yeah, I mean, that's true.
So, and I mean, one of the things that sets apart F-Zero X GX from, you know, a lot of racing games is the fact that you have that super fast, you know, futuristic racing, but with a 30-car field. And, you know, if you take that kind of big field into the online area, I think it actually gets a lot more interesting, because it was never as bad as Mario Kart about this kind of thing. But obviously when it's AI, there's this kind of stratification of like, okay, you know, some people are not going to do that well. And, you know, then there's going to be the middle of the pack, and then you can have your kind of rivals that have to do pretty well, or, you know, they're going to compete with you, which is not natural. I think the natural chaos of that kind of speed with actual human players online would be something very individual, something not that you don't. I mean, Mario Kart with 12 people online is certainly chaotic, and you know, it's fun. Really like that, but the F-Zero brand of racing with a whole bunch of people going around those corners, you know, trying to kill each other, doing like, because that's the. I mean, the AI could never be as aggressive as you would be towards those other people.
Right.
So I do feel like it would open it up, because, you know, F-Zero was fun, like split screen on N64 and whatnot, but you were talking about 4 cars. I mean,
Sure.
It takes a big element out of it. I mean, in some ways, it's still like kind of the full realization of the F-Zero X GX concept hasn't been met, because there hasn't been a game in the online era, and that is a shame. And that's a really simple thing. And, you know, I mean, talk about if you had the better graphics every now and again, that'd be enough. But online play is a big deal with F-Zeros, and it's low hanging fruit, but it's not. it obviously doesn't persuade anybody in the decision-making sort of tier of Nintendo.
So what I will tell you, and it goes back to the conversation about the game not having a champion, is that F-Zero's director, the original F-Zero, came off of F1 and Famicom Race F1 or whatever, because Nintendo of America said that basically it looks lame. And so they went and made F-Zero as sort of the response to that. He worked on a couple F-Zero games, but now he does hardware. The director of F-Zero X is a producer now who seems to pretty much work with second parties. So, like, Steel Diver Sub Wars, he produced on Star Fox Zero, he produced on Star Fox Guard, he produced on Tank Troopers. F-Zero GX, he was special thanks. Like, that was done completely externally.
Yeah, so you go. Yeah, and did a really good job with it.
The Game Boy Advance games were done externally. Like, there is a brevity of people inside Nintendo who have experience even making this franchise.
Yeah, I also don't feel like there's like a clamor kind of in general for these types of futuristic racing games anymore.
Futuristic racing games were more prominent years ago in the
late 90s, early 2000s.
You think of Wipeout, Extreme G, kind of era. Like I said, the racing games are always
pod racing,
as well. I mean,
yeah, and even on PS4, even in the present day, I mean, they released their Wipeout collection, and that didn't make a dent anywhere. I mean, that came and went. So
yeah, even over here, where racing games seem to be relatively a bigger deal, as I keep saying, and certainly the really big hitters do very, very well. It feels like the futuristic racing game doesn't have the same, which was it was developed here, wasn't it? Wipeout and Psygnosis, weren't they based?
Yeah.
So they probably got like outsized media coverage on the basis of that probably helped it sell relatively well here and stuff, but it doesn't feel like it's got the same kind of currency that it used to.
I mean, the genre's never recovered from tube sliders, is what we're telling you.
God, it had to come, didn't it?
Yeah. I mean, but like Fatal Inertia, this you want to count the fast games, like the last one of these I could think of.
Yeah, I mean, Fast definitely, it saw this void and filled it, and I guess some people could say maybe that's the appropriate kind of scale.
And they would also know exactly how much that game sold, too.
Oh, yeah, Nintendo knows exactly how much every single Fast game sold.
It's like, like we know exactly how much this clone of F-Zero sold, so... it's not like it's not even like Metroid where everybody's bitching about it either. So
it's important to remember that there is that story that Nintendo of Europe approached which EA studio was it? The one that made Burnout, and asked them to produce a Criterion. Yes, asked them to produce a vertical slice of an F-Zero game for a demo at E3. Mm-hmm. Like, this wasn't going to be like the game's going into full prod. This was like, we want to have a playable demo on the floor that people can look at and we can judge from there. And ultimately, Criterion just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
It's not like they're not trying. I think it's just a tacit admission internally that, like, we can't do it ourselves. Mm-hmm. We don't know what...
and then you got to find the right partner and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it is similar with the Metroid situation in terms of you've gone through a number of years where you didn't have kind of different games, and again, like who's ended up making the games? Federation Force is outside, Samus Returns is outside, and then they're putting together a new development team from scratch and working with Bandai Namco seemingly on Prime 4. And in those cases it has come together. With F-Zero, it kind of feels like they haven't quite got the right partnership. Things haven't sort of, there's more variables, there's more things that have to come together, perhaps for them to actually, kind of get the right circumstances to make an F-Zero game. And then, of course, there's the question of, is it worth the trouble? Commercially to actually, get these factors in place.
I mean, the refrain I've heard is like, well, just let Shinen make it. And the question is, do they even want to? Mm-hmm. Because they're effectively taking money out of their own mouths if they do that. Or out of their food out of their own mouths. Because they're essentially going to make a competitor to their own game that they currently continue to sell in the absence of a Nintendo branded one. Mm-hmm. And that would be asking them to produce what would undoubtedly be the most expensive game they've ever made.
Yeah.
And also potentially, rip their own sales. So and Nintendo sure as shit not gonna give them ownership of the game, for fuck's sake. So it's just a situation where these games don't sell. Like it is what it is. They don't sell. And
I think if you could find the sweet spot in terms of the production costs and the studio to handle it and all that, I mean, there's probably some viable the spot somewhere, where you could produce a game and it could do well enough to justify its existence. But they may be, we always talk about opportunity cost, in terms of what else could they have been doing with those sorts of the time and resources and effort and the slotting in the release schedule or whatever that maybe they think it could have been better spent elsewhere, even though in itself it could probably be modestly successful or something. So there's a lot of factors involved, but I do feel like the character component is kind of interesting because there was a time where they seemed to invest a lot in the characters of F-Zero. It did have an anime.
Suck.
Exactly. Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? It's weird that they had an anime. They had 3 GBA games in quick succession. They had the F-Zero GX around that time too,
and AX, which has the infamous "at 1,000 miles an hour, you better not blink" poster with what looks like Captain Falcon, and I'm trying to remember what she looked like. She had like clouds on her Jinko jeans with fur at the bottom, and she was only wearing a bikini top, but then she had like a big aviator jacket on over it and giant fucking. I think they were pink too. Oh, it was horrible. The character designs for the F-Zero franchise are universally and without error complete and utter trash.
But like 25 or 30 of them had like a CG cutscene when you finish, one of the tougher Grand Prix with them. Like it was ridiculous.
The anime did a job of making some of them not look like human garbage. Like that's it. Like that's the highlight of the F-Zero franchise character design.
But at the same time, like you think about going back to like with Melee when that came out, Smash Bros. Melee, and the fact that Fire Emblem got characters in that game apparently helped the decision to actually localize GBA Fire Emblem games for the first time in the series history. And then Captain Falcon is such a sort of mainstay of Smash Brothers and everything. Like it's such a kind of meme and all that kind of thing. You just think, they might try and trade off that at some point, but
it almost seems like he's outgrown F-Zero at this point. Like no one really cares about him, and at some point people will be like, "Wow, I just didn't even realize he was in this game." Like 20 years down the line, they won't even realize that he was in F-Zero as a game. It'll be like.
Like they just need to continue to push his design towards like Space Pirate Harlock they did in the freaking F-Zero anime, and just lean into like he's not he races a little bit, but we just want to make him look really fucking cool.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, if you put that character in front of me and I had no concept of what he is, I would think he's like a bad tokusatsu villain. Like he's just like, oh, this is the one that the Rangers are gonna, Kamen Rider's gonna show up and beat the shit out of.
It just looks like a Judge Dredd knockoff.
He does.
He does.
He is.
Like that. I mean,
because that's what he is.
Yep.
Oh, it's so bad. But like all the character, it's like, what are you salvaging from F-Zero? The gameplay? Well, there's other games that did that. Redout came out. That's kind of F-Zero-y. Although I don't think the Switch version's out yet. I think that's probably doomed. But like the characters, okay, the name sucks. Like, what does it mean?
Mm-hmm.
What does F-Zero mean as a name?
Well, it means
F1,
it's one better than F1.
It means it's faster.
But it's one worse than F1.
Well, no, because Formula One is the fastest. The fastest
sure.
class.
it's dumb.
I know I know you're not big on F1 in America, but yeah, people outside of America would get the gag. But America is a big market, so the fact that it wouldn't resonate with them is not to be thrown out. That is worth considering.
Well, I'm glad. I'm really glad that we write it as F-O-N-E too. That's a really nice way to summarize. Like, it's just not a good anything. There's nothing good about this franchise except for the gameplay. Like, what are you saving? And I think that's a big part of it. I think if these characters were better, or if it had more resonance, or if it wasn't just like that dude who screams Falcon Punch, which, by the way, has no origin in anything. They just threw that into the game.
Totally creation. And also, you got to say, just the continuing growth of Mario Kart as kind of...
Mm-hmm. That's exactly it, right? Like
Mario Kart has become, it was a big deal on Super Nintendo, N64, and all that. But it just feels like it's got bigger and bigger as time's gone on, and it's incorporated more and more components, like going in the air, going in the water, the anti-grav stuff, with 8, and it just feels like it's left increasingly little room for another kind of racing game from Nintendo themselves.
It's like the whole thing right from jump was a big like A/B test, and the people made their choice over time, right?
Yeah, that's that image of Ralph Wiggum with the indicator of like when it makes you feel bad, and he just keeps turning it towards sad and crying onto it. That's just Mario Kart. It just keeps turning his dial that way.
Yep.
I'm looking at the character sprite sheet from the F-Zero GP Legend. And, like, I give them credit that these characters don't make me feel bad looking at them, which is, like, the height of achievement for this franchise.
I still have a sealed copy of that game, James. I want you to know that.
Do you look at it longingly?
It's sitting there right on my... right on the shelf right now. Just sitting there.
Sorry to say, probably too late to redeem your Club Nintendo points.
There you go.
Damn it! God damn it!
I want to also note
plans,
that
I tell you.
it did have an anime, but so did Kirby around the same time. Like Nintendo signed a deal with somebody to make some of their shows into properties, and that was how that went down.
Transmedia properties?
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
I would also argue that the Kirby show is vastly superior because it doesn't care, because it's a Kirby property, and it kind of goes to why Kirby is more popular. It's in a more accessible. The genres in which Kirby can operate are more accessible, and
the many genres.
Yes, and B, like, it's just more pleasant to be in the Kirby verse than it is in F-Zero's like nightmare future hellscape. I mean, it's a blood sport. It's a fucking blood sport.
It's
Greg.
true. It's true. And of course, he's not at this point. He's
the human cost of F-Zero is uncalculable.
He's Nintendo's other captain because there's Olimar, and he's their other bounty hunter because there's Samus. So
that's true.
Yeah, he's very sort of bit of an also-ran, but. For all the reasons we said why it probably won't happen, I'd love it if it did happen, if they just took leave of their senses and did it. And there have been Nintendo projects sometimes that come along and you're like, why have they done this? But, it's often a good thing if they do. Just bring something crazy. And there's some weird seeds that get it. Like, Luigi's Mansion was like the least commercial thing that they could have launched the GameCube with. It was such a bizarre, like...
It was a tech engine. It was like, look what lighting and fabric distortion.
Yeah, and it's Luigi. I mean, it's almost, sort of explicitly saying to you, yeah, this is the warm-up act. This is the lesser thing, But,
look at all these fucking particle effects we can do, but this N64 Bowser model that we have as the final boss.
But then years later, like, Luigi's Mansion 2 is like quite a big hit on 3DS, and then we're getting the remake of Luigi, the original, on 3DS pretty soon. So, these sometimes...
Do they fix Bowser's model in that game? Yes or no?
Well, we're gonna have to see. Yeah,
they've got to. It's so bad.
I can only assume they will. I mean, they fixed the terrible Bowser model in Mario 64 DS, didn't they? Because
that's true.
He looked like a giant. He looked like a giant baby Bowser in the original 64, and then they fixed him.
He's not much better in Luigi's Mansion.
Oh God!
It's kind of amazing. That's a huge aside.
So
but
sometimes you can make some decisions for completely like non-commercial reasons that have weird payoffs down the road. If you just believe.
if you just don't care, I would be more than happy if they release an F-Zero game. I just don't think they should make it. I think if they are hell-bent that we must produce an F-Zero product, they should go outside to do it.
And that's the only way it would happen as well.
Yeah.
I mean,
What
feasibly.
if in Metroid Prime 4 the villain is Captain Falcon?
What if, John?
As a bounty hunter that Samus has to... Maybe they're going to kill off F-Zero in Metroid Prime 4.
Maybe they're going to kiss, and I'm like, no. I'm going to end the show right now.
I mean, hey, whatever. I mean...
No, it's true. It's just like all those bounty hunters from Prime 3 just get Falcon punched right in the fucking face. And he's like, oh, I'm the best man around, and then you have to take revenge because you like them so much.
I'm just saying they got
sad.
options.
What if they make an F-Zero game, but they go Kirby style with it, and it's a golf game? So it's F-Zero golf. I'm just saying. Like
Dr. Stewart's dream course, yeah.
Wow. Took a while, but we found the episode title.
We did. So Jonathan does say, like, look, they'll make Kirby games whatever they want. You know, be careful what you wish for. That's all I'm saying. That's the RFN motto. Be careful what you wish for. And that is how we're going to end the show. If you have emails, you can send them to rfn@nintendoworldreport.com, and we will do whatever the hell we just did here. Greg, music. If you please.
Yeah, we finally got the launch of Octopath Traveler coming up, which has been much anticipated, considering it goes back to the reveal of Switch at the Switchmas January 2017 event. But I choose to celebrate it by go back to the Bravely Default soundtrack. Well, once again, we've already been there at least twice. But this is a slightly different kind of thing. This is the airship theme from that game, which I've been Final Fantasy games, which is of course heavily based on. It's a sort of great tradition of those, and in fact, I think they had their own separate like class in Theatrhythm Curtain Call. For like airship stages, so it's very much a sort of established genre of RPG soundtrack, and this is a great one. It's an unbelievable. The original Bravely Default soundtrack is seriously good. It's not the composers are not carrying over, are they?
No, I don't think so.
To Octopath Traveler, so it's not like you can get excited on that basis. But hopefully you kind of go for some of the same spirit, because it was pretty much the sort of perfect synthesis of classic RPG, sensibilities with the big orchestral, full live instrument sort of soundscape.
And to be clear, there are some good songs in the second game. We always say like, oh, the first game though, wow, but the first game, though, wow.
It's true.
Like, it is what it is. But yeah, it's cool. That game comes out by the time we record this episode next week. It will be out. Finally. And on that, it's time to go, everybody. Bye.
Later.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.